Mikhail Tal tells a memory about him. I was preparing for my match against Kirchnoy. A tall man entered the hall. When I took a closer look, I realized he was Vitolins. Years ago, he and I participated in a tournament. We entered the endgame with opposite-colored bishops in that game. Vitolins took the initiative with a strong idea. And I was running out of time. He offered me a draw. I understand that he didn't want to win by letting my time run out. He immediately showed me a very nice variant to tie the game by force afterwards. He was a very gifted master, says Mikhail Tal. Besides that, many grandmasters who knew Alvis Vitolins said of him, he was the most talented master among us when we were young. Now, we're going back to 1979 for a great match. Lev Gutman vs. Alvis Vitolins. d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, bishop b4, Nimzo Indian defense. He pinned the knight and provided the central control for his minor pieces. This may give him flexibility in the future. In other words, in the future, he would be able to place pawns in the center using the traditional method, while still having the option of d6. So what I'm trying to say is, after bishop takes c3, he would give the bishop pair to his opponent. And of course, we know that bishops love open positions. So after bishop takes c3, by playing d6, it may be a much more accurate and principled approach to try to keep the center closed. That's what I'm saying. All right. Against the latest bishop b4 e3, kingside castling, and knight e2. Of course, the basic idea of developing the knight from the e2 square is to prepare a3, because if the a3 move is made and is responded with bishop takes c3, this time, this exchange would be responded with the knight takes c3. That's very important, because you want to gain an advantage in exchange for giving up the bishop pair. After the bishop takes c3 and b takes c3, the opponent's pawn structure on the queen side is weakened, and double pawns are created. However, the knight e2 move doesn't allow this, and in exchange for the bishop pair, it does not give the opponent the advantage he wants. Of course, because the f2 pawn is left open, there are thoughts of a stronger and wider center in the future. Or of using the f-pawn for a kingside attack. All right, after knight e2, here, you can calmly make d5, the main move. Or, a move like rook e8 is a preferred continuation today. Rook e8 aims at the idea that when the opponent plays a3, as we just mentioned, now the bishop takes c3 doesn't give us the advantage we want. So, if we can't weaken the opponent's pawn structure, then giving up the bishop pair might not be such a good idea. That's why he's opening with f8 square for the bishop. Yes, maybe he's losing tempo, but after all, the opponent developed his knight from e2. As a result of this knight's restraint in the development of many of his own pieces, he will almost certainly have to play again in the future, and risk losing tempo by playing with the same piece a second time. Of course, the ideas are, I moved my rook to e8, and instead of e7, I moved the bishop to e8, so that way, the rook's way is open. But here, against knight e2, according to his game character, Alvis Vitolins plays b5. It's a pawn sacrifice, and it's a clear sacrifice. The opponent accepted it. C takes b5. First, let's go over the basic idea of this pawn sacrifice. Of course, it is due to the desire for fast development. In fact, we see this in almost all modern defenses. The opponent makes many pawn moves in the opening to take the center, while you develop more pieces to take the lead in development. In addition, being able to exchange your own b-pawn with your opponent's central c-pawn should be considered a success. That's the general idea, but in order to keep going, you must be consistent, as Vitolins did. Let me say that this continuation is known as Vitolins' Gambit, after our master's name in chess literature. C takes b5 versus a6. Now he wants to get his pawn back on much better terms, because if he can do that, the rook's A line will be open. If the b takes a6 move was made here, this time with the bishop takes a6, the queen's bishop would have entered the game very quickly. Guys, your opponent has only developed two pieces at this point. One is pinned, and the other one is blocking the other pieces. When we look at the pieces of Vitolins, he castled, developed many minor pieces, and since the A line is also open, we can count this rook as a developed piece. However, at some point, there are strategic ideas such as exchanging bishops and preventing the opponent's right to castle. Of course, it's similar to the Benko gambit. He gave the A and B pawns and has opened verticals. As a result of these open lines, he can maintain a certain level of pressure and initiative throughout the game. However, I must warn you that you may not receive the result right away after giving the pawn. I mean, this continuation provides a medium and long-term positional advantage. For these reasons, it is not easy to play. All right. Let's go back to a6 move. Now, we want to take b5. Here, Gutman didn't want to give his opponent a fast development with the bishop takes a6. He played knight g3, so he wants to take the pawn with the bishop. Okay, the bishop has developed faster in b7 and is putting pressure on the center in particular, and the king side of the opponent. After bishop d2, the knight can now take a close interest in the b5 pawn, as it is unpinned. For this reason, Vitolins first played bishop takes c3, and after bishop takes c3, he chose A takes b5. Of course, since there is no knight in square c3 anymore, if he wants to take the pawn, he has to do it with the bishop, which the opponent did. Bishop takes b5, and of course, bishop takes g2. Give the rook. After rook g1, Vitolins moved his bishop back to c6. It's a principled approach, because the opponent has a pair of bishops in his hand, and it's always going to be a good plan to take one of those bishops. Of course, there is also a strategic advantage that Vitolins has. Now that the opponent played his rook, he can't castle to kingside, and the queenside castling won't be too safe and easy because of the rook. But in return, Lev Gutman can tell us that, well, my king may have been in the center for a while. I may not be able to perform kingside castling, but in return, the G line has been opened, and I will have good offensive plans against your king. And with knight h5, he made it happen right away. As you can see, he doesn't even care about this bishop. Don't even think about taking this bishop. The bishop takes b5, and then rook takes g7, king h8. And anyone who thinks this bishop is bad because of the pawns in the center should reconsider. After d5, the weakness of this cross and the shattering of the king side could have immediately ended the game. That's why, against knight h5, to end the pressure, Alvis first played knight takes h5, after queen takes h5. Now bishop takes b5. Gutman wasn't interested in this bishop again. Queen h6. He wants a mate. Now there's only one move that holds the mate, g6. Of course, this caused the a1 h8 cross to weaken incredibly. And here comes d5. Yes, now he wants a mate in one move. Vitolins' defense here is really good. First, he's leaving his pawn open on e5 so that when the bishop takes e5 move is made, he can play f6 with tempo by demanding the bishop. So if he can counter his opponent's attack at some point, he can gain tempo when the opponent has to play with his bishop one more time. That's important. However, Gutman made his opponent advance many pawns from the king side, weakening them. Once again, he doesn't care about this bishop, and with rook takes g6, makes an excellent rook sacrifice. Now, it is mandatory to take his rook. H takes g6, queen takes g6, king h8 is the only option. Guys, this is undoubtedly the most important and critical moment of the game. If Lev Gutman had first made a check from queen h6, he would have forced the opposing king to come to the g8. Then, when he made a queenside castling, he could bring up the checkmate pattern with the rook g1 and win this game. It's impossible to defend here. However, after king h8, instead of queen h6 check, Lev Gutman played king d2 directly. The idea is the same. Still, a minor change in the order of this move will have a significant impact on the game's outcome. What do we want now? Queen h6, king g8, and, in fact, queen h5, and mate with rook g1 when the king escaped. We've analyzed these variations in detail before. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for your thoughtful comments. To avoid spoiling the surprise, I didn't respond to the comments on purpose. I'd like to express my gratitude to everyone who watched the previous video and expressed their thoughts on this position and problem. There have been discovered some truly beautiful, unique, and intelligent ideas. That's lovely. There's only one defensive move here to avoid mate. I want you to think, when the queen checks, we're checkmate if our king comes to this line, because of rook g1. So when the queen checks, is there any way to keep our king here? Vitolins sees that and manages to find the bishop d3 move. It's really a great move. Of course, because no one says to your ear during the game, don't leave the game, there is one winning move. It is much more difficult to find this move with this psychology on the table. What's the bishop d3 move doing now? He left the bishop undefended. The idea is that if the queen checks, the king will no longer have to come to this line. The bishop will be able to close the h7, and the king will remain interestingly safe. Or, if the queen takes d3, the queen is deflected from the squares, where it can check and create a mate pattern, giving Vitolins more than enough time to recover in defense. Well, against bishop d3, If the king takes d3, which Gutman did, the queen e7 variant that didn't work before now works well here. How's that? Now, if the queen h6 checks, queen h7, careful, there's no time to take the undefended rook because it comes with the king's tempo. The queens have to be exchanged, and with the material superiority, that would be a very comfortable winning position. After king d3 and queen e7, Gutman sees his opponent's excellent defensive idea and continues the game with e4. So, what kind of move is e4? It's a very clever move. If the queen h6 checks again and queen moves to h7, as it no longer comes with this king's tempo, the opponent may have time to take rook. This is very important. Vitolins sees that. Of course, he doesn't even think about taking the bishop. He played queen g7. Of course, Lev Gutman doesn't exchange the queens. Queen h5, king g8, and with an extra tempo, he moved his queen to g7. Even if the king came here, the queen has now blocked the rook g1 move for a while. Now, he might really want to take the bishop. That's why he escaped the bishop to d4. You'll have to make another nice, punctual defense from now on. Vitolins played c5 because he's way ahead in material. A pawn doesn't even make a difference. Against bishop takes c5, rook c8. Give the bishop with tempo. And Gutman's playing f4. He doesn't care about this bishop again. If he takes the undefended bishop against rook takes c5, your last line would be very weak. After queen e8, the game would end in a draw with perpetual check. Remember, if you make a mistake of closing with the queen, there will always be rook g1, and that would end in a draw by repetition. That's why against f4, he sees that and plays knight a6. He completed his development, and now that the 8th line is beautifully defended, he really wants to take the bishop. If the rook g1 is played here, knight takes c5, and then queen takes g1 would have ended the game. That's why he played bishop f2. Now, rook g1 wants to take the queen. And what would Vitolins have done? Knight b4. Here's another delicacy of giving the bishop from d3. The knight b4 came with the king's tempo. So in these kinds of positions where both sides want to mate each other, you see how important a tempo is. Of course, there's not much of a choice. You have to be careful with knight c2. That's why Gutman played king e2. Against that, Alvis Vitolins played rook takes a2. Gutman's leaving the game. And why is that? Of course, if the rooks are exchanged, it's an easy win. But wasn't there a rook g1? It couldn't take the queen. The queen is pinned. Let's have a look. Of course, when Vitolins made rook takes a2, he calculated that. Here's a rook takes b2. If the king goes to the first horizontal, at worst, he'll exchange the rooks and save the queen. Or, the game could have ended with a mate in a few moves. So, against rook takes b2, it is not a good idea to come up to the first horizontal. If the king comes to f3, there's rook c3 against that, and when you close it with the bishop, the queen takes g1 and would still be a win. Of course, against rook takes b2, the most critical variant should have been king e3, because guys, remember, if you can't mate the opponent, your queen will fail, and since the queen is pinned, it can't attack. So what can be done against king e3? There's rook b3. He'll be checkmated in one move by king d4. And when the king gets to the second horizontal, rook c2. And then again in a few moves. The game will end with mate. You can calculate other variants. They all end with mate. That's why Gutman left the game to rook takes a2. It's a really great game. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you enjoyed this video, please like, leave a comment, and subscribe to this channel. and click on the bell icon to stay updated with my new videos. Hope to see you in the next videos. Take care.